In a quiet corner of Berlin, surrounded by apartment blocks and a community garden, there's a concrete cylinder. It weighs 12,000 tons. It is 40 meters wide, and it has been sinking into the ground, very slowly, for over 80 years. Most people who walk past it have no idea what it is. There's no plaque that explains the whole story. But this object is the tombstone of an idea that, had it succeeded, would have buried the Berlin we know today under the largest building ever conceived by human hands. They called the plan Germania, a new capital, a city built not for people, but for eternity, a city designed to outlast Rome. It never got built, not because the war stopped it, though the war did stop it. It never got built because the ground underneath Berlin could not hold the weight of the dream. Literally, the soil itself rejected it. This is the story of a city that collapsed before a single wall went up, and the strange concrete plug still sitting in a Berlin field today is the proof.
To understand why anyone thought this was a good idea, you have to understand what Berlin was in the 1930s. It was crowded, it was old, its streets followed medieval logic, not modern traffic, and to Hitler, it looked weak. It looked like a city that belonged to a Germany that had lost the First World War, not one that was about to dominate the next. In 1937, Hitler appointed a 32-year-old architect named Albert Speer as general building inspector for the Reich capital. Speer wasn't a Nazi ideologue first. He was an architect who wanted to build the biggest thing anyone had ever built, and Hitler was the only client on Earth who would say yes to every single request. The plan was simple to describe and insane to execute. Bulldoze the existing center of Berlin, carve a new north-south axis through the city, a boulevard nearly 5 kilometers long and 120 meters wide, wider than the Champs-Élysées, lined with ministries, theaters, and a train station bigger than anything in Europe.
At one end, a triumphal arch, designed to be so large that the entire Arc de Triomphe in Paris could fit inside its archway. Engraved on it would be the names of every German soldier killed in the First World War, over 1.8 million names. And at the other end of the axis, the centerpiece, the building Hitler personally sketched as a teenager, decades before he had any power at all, the Volkshalle, the People's Hall. It would have a dome 16 times larger than the dome of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, 290 meters tall. A single room inside it could hold 180,000 people standing shoulder to shoulder, large enough that the Reichstag, the entire current German parliament building, could fit inside it more than 30 times over. This was the honey. This was the version of the story the Nazi propaganda machine wanted Germans to believe, that Berlin would become Germania, a capital so monumental it would still be standing in 10,000 years, a city that proved the superiority of the German people in stone, the same way Egypt proved itself in pyramids. It was supposed to be finished by 1950. It never had a chance. Here's the problem nobody in the propaganda films ever mentions. Berlin sits on sand and clay, left behind by glaciers thousands of years ago. It is, geologically speaking, a swamp wearing a city's clothes. Builders had known this for centuries. It's why old Berlin buildings were kept relatively low and spread their weight wide. The Volkshalle alone was projected to weigh somewhere around 1 million tons. Speer's own engineers weren't sure the ground could hold it. Trying to build Germania on Berlin's natural soil was like trying to balance a cathedral on a wet sponge. So in 1941, Speer's team did something almost nobody knows about. Before committing to the real triumphal arch, they built a test object, a dummy. A concrete cylinder, the same shape, the same weight as the planned arch, sunk into the exact patch of ground where the real one would eventually stand.
That cylinder is the Schwerbelastungskörper, the heavy load-bearing body. It's the same object we opened with, the one still sitting in a Berlin field today. For years, engineers measured how far it sank, and it sank. Not collapse and crumble sank, slow, creeping, millimeter by millimeter sank. The kind of sinking that would eventually crack a real building apart over decades, the kind you can't simply pour more concrete to fix. The test confirmed the fear. The ground under the planned triumphal arch could not support its real weight without serious and staggeringly expensive foundation work. And that was just one structure. The Volkshalle was vastly heavier still. Germania's first real building wasn't a monument. It was a confession written in concrete, sinking into the mud of its own ambition. Even if the engineering had worked, the human cost was already being paid before a single major structure was finished. To build the north-south axis, planners marked roughly 50,000 Berlin homes for demolition, and a disproportionate number of the buildings seized first belonged to Jewish residents, evicted under the cover of urban redevelopment, their apartments handed to Aryan Germans, displaced by the same construction project. It was ethnic cleansing disguised as a zoning plan.
The granite for Germania's monuments had to come from somewhere too. Speer's organization contracted with the SS to quarry stone at Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria, where prisoners carried granite blocks up the infamous stairs of death, 186 uneven steps, for a building project most of them would never live to see, let alone benefit from. This is the part the glossy renderings never show. Germania wasn't only a fantasy of marble and gold. It was funded, quarried, and partially cleared through forced labor and the dispossession of Jewish families, years before the worst of the Holocaust's industrial machinery was even built. And economically, the numbers never worked either. Some post-war historians estimate the full Germania plan, train stations, ministries, the arch, the hall, the housing displacement payouts, would have cost the equivalent of tens of billions of dollars in today's money, an enormous strain on a state that was simultaneously trying to fund the largest war machine in European history. By 1939, when the war started, Germany was already redirecting steel and concrete away from Speer's monuments and toward tanks, U-boats, and bunkers. By 1943, with Allied bombers turning real Berlin neighborhoods into rubble nightly, Hitler quietly ordered construction work on the Axis project suspended. Not canceled. Hitler reportedly still believed it would resume after victory. It just never got the chance.
The city that was supposed to prove German civilization would outlast every empire in history was, within a decade of being drawn on paper, mostly rubble. The real buildings that stood when the war ended were the ordinary ones Speer's plan was designed to demolish. The cylinder is still there. Berlin couldn't afford to tear it down after the war. Explosives strong enough to destroy it would have shattered every window in the surrounding neighborhood. So they left it. Today, it has a small viewing platform. Tourists climb it for the view. Most don't know what they're standing on. It's a strange kind of monument, not to greatness, to miscalculation. Every empire that has ever tried to build something to outlast time has run into the same quiet, indifferent obstacle. The ground itself doesn't care how big your dream is. It only cares how much it weighs. Germania was never defeated by an army. It sank under its own weight before it was even born.